all, and welcome to the latest episode of the Horror Countdown podcast. I'm your host, Donna Nelly, and with me tonight is cross media horror producer, Lady Miriam.
Hey, nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on board. I'm really happy we got to do this because we're going to be doing a topic that is near and dear to your heart based on our pre show conversation. We're going to be discussing our favorite witches in films.
Whoop, whoop.
So, yeah, we were discussing a little bit about this at length before we started, but let's go ahead and give a little history about the topic at hand and why we selected it.
Yeah, well, witches in film are an interesting phenomenon because although we all have the typical witch in mind and how we imagine a witch to be, the way to use it and what we expect the witch to mean, what role we expect it to carry, really varies depending on the context we're consuming the medium in, or historical context or sociological context. What is going on with people? What is going on with the filmmakers reacting to the situation? And what is the audience reading into this role, into the story? Now, a lot of this is a mix of history and opinion. So feel free to fact check things and tell me that I'm wrong and correct me. But this is just a brief overview. I'm not an expert by any means. I'm just passionate about the topic. I have friends who are passionate about the topic, live in the world of witchcraft, if you will, and so this comes from the heart rather than from the books. But I think looking at witches and the early role of witches, they're very much a portrayal of the outcast. So usually you have a town, a village, a community, and people who belong to it, and the witch for hundreds of years, and not just, in reality, but also in stories, was representative of someone who lived outside of that community. And it's a really interesting situation or relationship between these individuals and the community nearby, because on the one hand, they are not part of this group. They don't invest the same things. They can't expect the same sort of help. But often the witch is still there on, a hero's journey to get some sort of input to help them get on the right path, or maybe corrupt them and test them and try to figure out, well, is this additional input from someone with an outsider's perspective, is it helping the hero, or is it hindering them? And how does the hero deal with this knowledge and this information that he, she, they get from this individual? So it's always been an interesting character because the witch as an outcast offers a lot of stuff like medicinal assistance, or maybe pursuing tasks that are usually not considered respectable, and helping people hide secrets or healing that they usually can't do within their community. So the role of the outcast has always been in storytelling with this witch role a very complex one. And that was for hundreds of years, thousands of years, depending, even if you look at fairy tales and folklore. So there's a lot of that going on. Technically, folklore stories with a version of a witch have been around for a very, very long time. But then if we look at the 20th century, we have the witch suddenly shifting its relevance in society, at least in Western culture. You often in the 40s and 50s had maybe a cinematic or film portrayal of a witch that was very close to what we know to be the femme fatale. And as you know, the reason why the femme fatale as a character trope was created, especially after the world wars, so after the First World War, after the Second World War, was because whilst the men were all fighting these wars, the women had to become more independent than they used to be. So when guys came back and they suddenly saw these women are doing everything, they're not just cooking, cleaning, and taking care of the kids, but they're working, they're making money, they're hustling, that independent woman that really was a result of war times it caused mixed feelings with a lot of people in society, whether it's general society or men in particular, because on the one hand, they were distrusting of the female independence, but at the same time, they were drawn to they were drawn into the allure of the independent woman, and that was the femme fatale. And a lot of witch images that were kind of created in the early mid-century, they leaned into that femme fatale image because again, it's about the outcast female, who kind of takes care of herself, and so the two were related and sometimes just connected in roles. And then we kind of move into the 60s and 70s where the role of the witch changed yet again, and again there was this huge dualism, and we're going to continue to talk about dualism with the witch, more in today's episode. But what's interesting here is that you had two different versions of the witch. So on the one hand, you had this, I'm going to call it a hippie version of a witch. You were looking at witches that were connected to nature. They saw themselves as part of an ecosystem. They respect the planet, and therefore they receive strength in return from Mother Nature, from the planet. Again, Mother Nature already being a feminine depiction of our environment and nature in general. So you had that on the one hand, with the, 60s, 70s hippie movement and commune movement and everything you had going on then. But then on the other hand, you also had shows like Bewitched, for example, where you took the simple housewife character and basically in a humorous and ironic way showed that even an average woman, the fact that she can keep a household going, is close to magic. Like, how do they do that? And obviously, it's pushed to its limits in this series. But adding that sense of magic and wonderment to the role of a suburban wife and mother. So, on the one hand, we're leaving the conventional role of a woman in a family unit, and on the other hand, we are using witchcraft or the life as a witch to glamorize the role of a woman in a family unit. So it's quite interesting, and that's where we first see some of this, intense dualism, such opposites of the scales. And then we move to the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, and suddenly the witch becomes more powerful, more rebellious, slightly punk, depending on their circles. And the witch is symbolic for, again, female independence, but in a rebellious kind of way, and sisterhood. And that's where you get a lot of series like, Buffy, Charmed, and a whole bunch of movies that kind of show like these coming of age stories of these young girls like in the craft, and they're trying to figure out their role and everything. So that's where you get a lot of those movements. It's still very female focused mostly. There are male witches as well, but generally very female focused, and just very rebellious and very much about the community amongst witches. And what I find more interesting is kind of looking at witches now and witches in media over the last 20 years. And this is my perception. So again, feel free to contradict me when I'm done. But I've noticed that the dualism has now kind of spread between the two forms of film. On the one hand, series and television, and on the other hand, indie films in particular. I mean, film, but focus on independent filmmaking. Those are the two that I picked out because I just found them to be the most opposite and the most interesting. And with witches in television, I'm going to name examples like American Horror Story, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. Witches are very fashionable still. I mean, witches have been made fashionable ever since the femme fatale, really. But television has kept that. They're dressed well, they're styled well, even if they're eccentric. They're very interesting looking individuals. But what television has done completely differently is now the witch as a trope is being used to challenge gender roles and gender identities. So now it's not just female focused. A witch is a male, a female, non-binary. It can be anything, and sometimes, depending on the year and the format, it's spelled out. But often, when you're a witch, and they don't necessarily separate anymore. And it's something that television has really been experimenting with to kind of move with the trends of society, figuring out, well, what does it mean? What does gender mean? What does it mean for us? What does it mean for others? What perspectives from other people can we use to understand different lifestyles, different experiences? And the witch, with all its magic, becoming a gender neutral thing, is really helping on that quest to kind of smash those gender role expectations and take it in a different direction. So that's the one end of the scale. And now the other end of the scale with independent filmmaking, a lot of indie films seem to be taking witch characters that are completely inspired by folklore. So we've got the film The Witch, we've got The Wretched, we've got A Dark Song, Hellbender, Doister, Two Witches. These are all indie horror films that are about a or numerous witches, and they're all inspired by folklore tales. So they're sometimes like evil fairy tale characters, or they're still very close to nature. Their designs are only a little bit humanoid, but they can change that. There's just a lot more to it. Some lean more into the, connection between witches. Sometimes they're alone and outcasts. That really varies. But what they have in common is that they're all inspired by folklore. And the reason why indie films seem to be doing this is because they want to depict a commentary on human nature itself. And when you dive into folklore and you strip people of all things technology, it really boils down to people and society and how they think and what they do and what their value system is. And that's really interesting because it kind of says, in a very witty way, you know what, no matter how fancy your technology may be and what you use in your day-to-day life, the issues and challenges you have as a human have been the same for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And as a human being, you're not better than your forefathers and ancestors were. You're the exact same person with the exact same problems. And this folklore inspired creature is going to strip you of all things that make you modern and really show you that that's the case, which is a really interesting movement. And again, has a different agenda than a lot of witches in television, but nonetheless is a result of where we are as a society now. Now, over the last 2 years, there's been yet another movement on the scene that I've watched with witches, and that's some series, maybe more than 2 years, a few years, last few years. And that is series that kind of blend the two. So the two examples that I wrote down are the French series Marianne, and or Marianne, I'm probably butchering the name, and then the more recent series, Brand New Cherry Flavor. And these are interesting because the hybrid that they choose in their style is that the series are still fashionable, the characters are still fashionable, and yet they're still inspired by folklore and have their commentary on society. So it's kind of blending the two. It's making things very clean, very impressive to look at, very aesthetically pleasing, until the horror steps in and it's gruesome or terrifying and dark. But the horror works best because of how clean and beautiful the rest of it is. But it's stripping, even in modern day society, it's stripping the characters of all things that are modern and technological and showing that their issues are still human issues. So it's a hybrid. We've seen this hybrid version. So that's what I've kind of perceived witches and media to be in a nutshell. Don, I'd be interesting to hear what you think about everything.
I kind of got lost in that. That was masterful. It makes a lot more sense saying it out loud, rather than just hearing bits and pieces like over history. I've never really thought of the connection between femme fatale and witchcraft, although it does make a lot of sense since you
Mm,
said it with the use of using like their feminine wiles as sort of an anagram for their like sensory powers as sort of like a bewitching attitude to like put them under their spell and make them do bend to their whims. It's a pretty interesting way of looking
right.
at it, and yeah, that makes a lot of sense now that you said that. Turning it into the 60s, with the family friendly stuff like you said with Bewitched, I was even thinking like I Dream of Jeannie in a sense where even that's still
Yeah,
sort of like using like witch like powers in a sense, trying to like
for sure.
trying to tame the image down to a point where you're not necessarily trying to make them objects of like ostracism, and trying to make it like a more appealing thing to sort of balance it out, to sort of like play into along the civil rights movement. And you see all of like the equality and women's rights and all of that. You see like the movement to try to change it away from like the evil mysticism and like the dark magic, and to sort of try to turn it into like a family friendly you know atmosphere. And you try to not necessarily use the same old, but add like a new spin to it. Like you said, using your powers as a beneficiary tool, rather than I'm gonna I'm gonna cast a spell and turn this guy into a frog or whatever. Like use like an
Yeah.
example like that. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. A lot of the the evolution in history, you see a lot of a lot of the stuff you mentioned, like the craft. You see like a lot of appealing to teens, and try to bring that aspect together alongside a lot of the women's equality that was still an issue at the time. And you make the focus all about female empowerment, and they're teens, so they're still going through their their early stages of puberty cycles, and tying that into like the
Mm.
discovery of witchcraft, and using that as sort of I'm trying to think of like I don't want to say enhancing, but to sort of like parallel, like a parallel form of female evolution, and
Right.
gender. It makes a lot of sense with a lot of a lot of what you were saying there. um I can't speak too much of the modern day stuff, just because a lot of it is I don't want to say a lot of uncommon, because a lot of the films you mentioned I didn't get to. I haven't seen. The only one I have seen that you mentioned is The Witch. So that one was. I'm kind of a little bit lost on the modern day stuff, so I'll just have to take your word for it based on everything else you said. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I really like the way that that came out, because it put a lot of holes together, and a lot of connecting the dots, so to speak. I wouldn't have thought to make them, but I can definitely agree with where you're going, and yeah, a lot of the stuff just makes a lot of sense.
I mean, I would definitely recommend these indie witch films because they do put a new twist on the storytelling. And I mean, you've seen The Witch, and considering how indie film and artistic it is, I'm impressed by how mainstream the film really became. Because if I had seen it, for example, as a festival submission, I would have said amazing film, run it at the festival, but then I wouldn't have known, well, is this going to get the kind of distribution that runs it in the movie theater? I don't know. And obviously, it's connected to larger companies that have that sort of access. However, that doesn't mean that the audience, the mainstream audience, will react as such. And that was a big surprise for me. It was very slow pace, and there was a lot of building of tension for these particular brief moments to happen that left an impression. So I was very impressed by the impact that that film had. The Wretched is directed by the Pierce brothers, and I don't want to say too much about that. A Dark Song, I would definitely take note of because I would say based on the feedback I've heard from like the active community that deals with these sort of cultural phenomena, that A Dark Song is probably the closest to the idea of what real witches have imagined a ritual to be like. And it has, even though it's not the exact replica of an existing historical ritual, it really has an authenticity to it that you'll appreciate. And if you don't know much about witch communities in real life, it'll feel very bizarre to watch it and definitely be an experience. So I recommend that. Hellbender has been doing the rounds because it was produced by a family on a very low budget.
The Adams Family. Yeah. No, I have seen this one actually. I kind of missed that one in the description. I think you kind of glossed over the title. Yeah, I have seen it, and actually, we will be talking about that on my end.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, so that's
Okay.
that's
Yeah.
definitely one. And
Okay. Yeah.
then
Yeah.
yeah.
I didn't catch that when you were going over the titles. I'm sorry. Yeah, I have seen
Yeah,
that.
no, it's fine. I also didn't give you time to react, so that
Oh, no
that
worries. Yeah.
makes me at fault anyway. But Doyster is a very new found footage film, which I recommend, and two, which is I think did the festival circuit last year. And the directors live in California, but they're originally from France. And that also gives the film a very different flavor because they're kind of um, they're doing an American style film, indie film, but with influences from French folklore and French storytelling around witches. So again, very different. And Doyster has, I think, is from Scandinavia. I can't remember which country exactly. Again, when you have different cultures mixing, it always has a different flavor, which is why I listed those films. They're very, very different films, but they're all about witches, and all the witches are inspired by folklore. So if you get a chance, some of them you can watch, others you'll have to go to festivals to watch because they're just that fresh. But I do recommend getting whatever you can get your hands on.
Nice. Yeah, I've definitely got them marked down. They sound a lot of fun. So,
Mm.
Dark Song, I know the name. There's a few friends I know that have seen it. It actually seems kind of split. Actually, a lot of the friends that I've seen it over in Europe rave about it. A lot of the American friends I've seen it aren't very high on it.
I could totally see that. Well, I live in
Yeah.
Europe, so just as an
Yeah.
explanation too, you know,
Yeah.
and
Like I
it
said,
does have a different pacing.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. That's the only one that I'm familiar with, just because I've seen other people that have seen it. The European friends I've seen rave about it. The American ones are kind of lukewarm to mild, putting it lightly. But yeah, I do have the others listed down, so I'm definitely keen to track them down, or if at least not keep an eye out for them when they arrive. So yeah, that was
Go for it.
like I said, yeah, that was interesting. Yeah, I was kind of lost in that for a few seconds, so maybe that was how I missed Hellbender.
Wait a second, did she say Hellbender or not? 50 minutes later. What do you think, Don?
But yeah, no,
No, yeah.
yeah, that was fascinating. So in terms of segueing into our list, I'm not sure of how you approached it, but I took it under the under the approach of how impactful the witch actually played a part in the film, not whether or not the quality of the film. So I kind of have
Right.
not necessarily the greatest well-made films on here, but they're more how impactful the witch is in the film. So if you can speak a little
Cool.
bit about how you formed your list, and we'll get started on there. But I don't know how you did it.
Well, I cheated. Actually, no, I didn't fulfill the assignment. So I've been naughty. Instead of doing a list of favorite witch films, I picked five with some interesting fun facts. So I would love to hear your list of 10 and discuss why you chose them.
Sure.
But then rather than talking about my favorites, I just have random facts and we can have a chuckle over some of those.
All right, so I'll just read off my 10, and we can react real quickly. So,
Perfect.
yeah, my number 10 was an Indonesian film. It's one of my all-time favorites. I went with Mystics in Bali.
Ooh, good one. Yes. Okay,
Yeah.
yes. I was wondering when you said Indonesian, I was like, oh, he's gonna say that one, but that's so weird. It's such a weird film,
Oh, I
and
absolutely love that movie.
love it.
Yeah, that movie is amazing. Yeah, definitely recommend that one.
And
Um,
again with that one, because you're looking at a different culture, the depiction of what this crazy ass witch does and what she's capable of physically and magically, it's so
yeah,
beyond what we're used to, because to us the witch just has the pointy hat and stuff. And I don't want to spoil anything. I mean,
yeah,
simply by googling the title, you'll see stuff that makes you go, what am I looking at, what am I watching? But
right, yeah,
that's a great one. Yeah.
yeah. So my number 9 was The Lords of Salem, the Rob Zombie film.
Okay, good. Classic. Love it.
Yeah, yeah. My number 8 was Hellbender.
Here we go. Well, now, why did you pick Hellbender?
So I picked Hellbender because it's I'm trying to, be a little spoiler here because my first thoughts is to, go deep into spoiler territory, but it's a mother-daughter relationship that involves witchcraft as a means of enhancing their evolution and their growth cycle in a sense. The discovery that her mother is capable of these powers, and it's growing in her after the encounter with the teens, and you see that it draws the two of them together, but then also drags them apart to where you see that there's now all of a sudden this combative relationship in their, the mother and daughters are now suddenly combative to a point where she's growing up, she's being a little bit more rebellious, she's, not wanting to spend as much time with her mother, and she wants to, go out and explore the world. It just so happens to coincide with the fact that, she's suddenly coming into her own as a witch. So it's a fun little back and forth dynamic. I really enjoyed it, and I had a lot of fun with it. So
Yeah, it's
uh
really good. And considering again it was a family endeavor with like a super low budget, but and sometimes there's shots where you can see that, but generally it was made with
yeah.
so much heart, and it's such a captivating story as well. So I definitely dug it.
Yeah, my number 7, I've always really liked this one. It's a more recent one. I went with Pie Wacket.
Oh, interesting. I haven't heard anyone speak about Pyewacket in, well, since it came out. I got a screener at the time, but most people I know have not seen it, funnily enough.
Oh, I love it. It's one of my favorite modern films. I really enjoyed it. So super dark, great build up, lots of
Very moody.
yeah, very great atmosphere. Brutal final half. I absolutely love the way that it plays off there. But yeah, I've really been a big fan of that one.
Yeah, that was
Um,
a good one.
Yeah, my number 6, I went old school with this one. I'm not necessarily sure a lot have seen it. I went with The Long Hair of Death.
I have not seen that. Okay, let me just look it
Yeah.
up.
Okay, so it's an Italian film from 1964.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
it's a old school gothic horror
Barbara
classic.
Steele.
Barbara Steele, yeah. She plays dual roles in this. She plays a woman who her mother was sentenced to death as a witch, and years later, she grows into the daughter who's engaged to be married to the king who actually murdered her father. So,
Whoa.
so yeah,
Forget Dynasty. That's real intrigue.
yeah. So yeah, the she's engaged to the son of the guy who killed her mother, and your mother's spirit ends up possessing her and sends her out on a rampage using the powers to take the family down and seek revenge.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's really fun. I'm a huge fan of that one. My number
I know what I'll
five.
be watching this week.
My number 5. I went a little Asian. I went with Impatigore.
Impatigore.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna Impatigore. Is there a different title, a different name for the movie?
No.
Oh, this is oh, I know this. This is one of the newer ones.
Yeah. This one
Yeah,
is.
I've seen this.
Yeah. This one is amazing. I'm a huge fan of this.
Also Indonesian. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll come back to that country one more time, but yeah,
Oh.
yeah, I'm a huge fan of this one. I love the concept of what it does. I love the black magic. I love this town mystery that pervades over the entire film. Brutal gore. I'm a huge fan. So
Well, and I would say, I mean, I don't know about you, but when I saw this, I knew nothing about the film. And it starts off again very like family centric, and you're trying to figure out, okay, well, what are they going through, what's this about? I had no idea it was going to go off
mm,
the rails the way it did, and I'm not really spoiling anything, because if
yeah,
whatever you're expecting, it's just expect less or nothing, and let it lead you, because it,
yeah,
again, the space and the atmosphere, and even the location was, it's technically a house in a forest, but there's something about it that's so uncanny. So yeah,
right.
that was definitely got to spread the word on that one. There's some weirdness going on in that. Go
Yeah.
Indonesia.
Yeah. So again, my number four and three are both old school stuff. So I'm a huge fan of that, those kinds of witchcraft films. Number four was Burn Witch Burn, or Night of the Eagle.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of that one. I love what it does. Starting in, one of the early precursors to what you're saying, the family friendly, trying to, tone the witch down, sort of, happy homemaker kind of a witch who's trying to use her powers for good, but things backfire kind of a thing.
Oh
Yeah,
no.
great stuff there. I'm a huge fan. And number
Very
three,
good.
yeah, number three again, old school film. I went with Black Sunday, the Mario Bava film.
Yes. Yes. That's a good one.
I'm
Is
a
that the one with the scene in the end with her face
Yep, the poker
changing?
hole.
Oh my,
Yeah,
that,
that's her.
sorry. So that one, you know what, people listening to this, so you should watch that film anyway, in any case, but then watch how she's being filmed, and her at the end of the film, and her age changes. And before you look it up, I could say it now, but I won't. Before you look it up, guess how they did it with the technology of the time. Because it is so bonkers. And I mean, I only gave myself 2 minutes, 5 minutes to figure it out, and I failed, and ended up, having someone tell me. But oh, so clever. Again, very scary, very moody.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan. It's one of my all-time favorites, actually. I can say that this is in my top 10 of all time. I absolutely love this film.
Hmm,
Just impeccable
it's
atmosphere,
good.
fantastic visuals, great storyline, for the time being a sense. And oh my God, that opening, just
Ugh.
talk about talk about an immersive quality right there.
It's
Yeah,
so good, and yeah, so elaborate as well. Sometimes I look at films these days, and I'm like, they don't do that for movies anymore. It was so good.
yeah. So like I said, I kind of went off the rails with this. So my numbers two and one are both Asian. So
Uh-oh.
yeah, I kind of delved into the weirdness here. So number two is the Indonesian Queen of Black Magic remake, the one from 2020. Uh,
I'm just looking up to see if I know it, because I don't think I do. No, I haven't
yeah.
seen this one.
Oh my God, this movie is fantastic. So it's about it's a group of kids who, as adults, reunite at their old orphanage to pay tribute to their the orphanage head who's about to expire and to pass away. So they stage a little reunion to get together and reminisce about old times, and come to find out that there's a secret involving a town witch buried underneath the cellar of the house, and she's come
Oh
back for
God,
she's come back for revenge in the most heinous of ways possible. Yeah, there's a scene
that
where
sounds terrifying.
yeah, this is just one of the most brutal things I've seen. There's a sequence where a person takes a straight razor to their arms and just absolutely shreds them, and it's not the most
Oh.
yeah, it's not the most brutal thing that happens in the film. Trust me. Yeah, this thing is a
Okay,
gore
well,
fest.
that's on my watch list now. Thank you.
Yeah, this thing is a gore fest. I absolutely loved it. I had so much fun with it. And then my
Damn.
number Yeah, my number one. I've championed this film for years. It's one of my all-time favorites. Again, I went with Hong Kong's The Boxer's Omen.
The Boxer's Omen. I also have not seen this.
Like I said, I went off the rails.
Yeah, slightly. Yeah, I'm noticing it now. But I
So
mean, I'm looking at pictures and it looks amazing.
okay, so I'll try to do this justice because the plot's a little weird. So the so basically, this small time hoodlum in Hong Kong, his brother is a championship kickboxer, and his brother ends up winning a championship match against his rival, but in fury over losing, the rival ends up crippling the brother. So he ends up going back to his hometown where the hoodlum challenges him to a fight. Where, however, while there, the hoodlum ends up getting in contact with a group of monks who believe that he is the celestial twin spirit of the head monk of their order who died in a wizard battle against an evil order and try to teach him the ways of their organization to defend the world against the monks that are trying to take over the world. That's
Okay, so a very simple plot. Okay, well,
essentially,
I wish they had just filled some of the gaps, but whatever.
yeah.
They can't all be winners.
So, yeah, I've actually got a funny story about being traumatized by this, because
Oh, fun.
I had initially watched this thinking it was a kickboxer ripoff.
Um,
Yes.
almost.
Yeah, so I picked it up blindly at a TV. I picked it up blindly at a store, not knowing anything about it. I mean, this is like back in the early 2000s. Like, I didn't have a phone. I didn't have, no pocket internet, none of that. I was just basically going blind. So I picked it up. I see Boxer's Omen. I think, ooh, Kickboxer, Boxer's Omen. Like for some reason, the Jean Claude Van Damme film kick popped into my head. I thought it was a ripoff. The back of the film featured this guy getting punched in the face in a boxing match. I thought, all right, might as well. So I ended up watching it just before dinner one day, and there's a scene with veins popping out of a person's body that resembles tentacles.
Oh my
And
God.
yeah, I'll just leave it at that. Yeah, fun stuff.
Sounds
And
fun. Yeah. It's on
yeah,
my list now.
oh yeah, yeah, it's so good. It's just over the top. It's just a continuous one-upsmanship of magic rituals and rites. It's just so good.
It's
I
amazing.
mean, yeah, there's scenes where crocodile skull. There's like 50 crocodile skulls that just manifest in this one room, and they try to snap this one guy, and then he manages to get away, and so all of a sudden all of the eyes turn into giant bats, so he has to try to fend himself off against the giant bats that appear.
Of
and when
course, naturally,
and then when
as
all the
one
bats,
does.
yeah, so once all the bats are done away with, they merge into this giant one-eyed cyclops monster. And
Of course,
continue the
because
attack.
what else?
So yeah,
That's
it's
amazing.
yeah, this is just an absolute just spectacle. I mean, it's just so good. I like I said, I've been a fan of this one for a long time. It kind of traumatized me in a sense, so it kind of sticks with me. But oh man,
All
yeah,
the best films do.
yeah. But yeah, that was my list. Like I said, I kind of went off the beaten path with this one, but
Slightly. I
yeah,
mean, I feel proud that I've seen at least a few of those, but some of those I have not seen. So you have just made my watch list a little longer, and they're great recommendations and very versatile. It's a very versatile list. So yeah, I like it. Well done, you.
nice. Yeah. Real quickly for honorable mentions, I would have had Hansel and Gretel Get Baked, a horror comedy from a few years ago. I had a lot of fun with it. It was kind of goofy and silly, but one of those not really worthy of a list. But I also had a film called Terror. It's a Suspiria knockoff about a witch coming back from the
Okay.
past. Yeah, it's from 78 or 79. It's a UK film, and it's basically a witch coming back and killing off the descendants who murdered her, kind of a thing. Kind of tropey, but I had fun with it. I also had the
That's
Russian,
cool.
yeah, I also had the Russian film V, Spirit of Evil. Um,
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah, it's another old school film. Basically, a guy is tasked with looking over a witch's grave, a person's grave for several nights and performing a ritual to allow the soul to pass over. But he doesn't realize that she was a witch and is trying to tempt his soul the entire time. So
Ooh. Yeah,
yeah,
that I have also not seen, so that's also going on the list, but that's an interesting premise. Damn, okay.
yeah, it's really good. And then I had a I wasn't really sure how this would play in as a witch film. I kind of looked at it more as a cult film, but it always was caught under as witch film. City of the Dead. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, I always thought of it as cult film, but it kept on popping up as a witch film, so I wasn't really sure. And it had been so long since I seen it, and I always thought it was a cult film. So I
Yeah,
was
I
like,
thought it was.
yeah,
But
so
I guess when it comes to like these rituals and stuff, it's easy to argue
yeah,
in
that
the
was kind
one or the other way. I mean, it was advertised as a witchcraft centric film, so.
of. Yeah, and then this was one that I was really wanting to put on the list, and I couldn't make it. But I had Curse of the Demon.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's definitely worth
Yeah,
an honorable mention.
yeah, that one was. Yeah,
Yeah. No,
go
no,
ahead.
speak, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was generally going through a few films that weren't in your list that are worth honorable mentions, and I'm mentally Curse of the Demons or Demon is definitely, yeah, worth bringing up. And also, I was thinking, well, you mentioned Suspiria, and then there's Gretel and Hansel, which is a more modern, again, indie witch film. It's not to be mistaken with the comedy that you named. But yeah, Curse of the Demon is a cool one, definitely.
Nice. So let's move on to yours. What were the ones that you had managed to find? Because I'm kind of intrigued about these.
Okay, so I took five very famous witch films and I picked a fun fact for each one because I'm a big fan of either, the process behind filmmaking or just behind the scenes info that you usually don't know about that I kind of geek about, like random trivia is super up my alley. So I picked famous witch films with random trivia, and five because I figured that would be enough for now. So my first fun fact is for the film The Witch that we have mentioned numerous times today, from 2015. So the production designer uh, went with the film's DP and costume designer to Plymouth, Massachusetts to learn more about what life would have been like for Puritan farmers. So he actually studied their structures and tools and visited various original sites where Puritan farms once were, and even met with an archaeologist who was local to the area to learn more about 17th century farming in Plymouth. So, with this knowledge that came from their research and the consultation with the archaeologists, he was able to build the farms and just the structure of everything in a very authentic Puritan style. So, yeah, it wasn't just a cool looking old farm with a fence. There was a lot of research that actually went into that. So yeah, I thought that was interesting.
Nice. Yeah.
So the second film I have on my list is The Witches from 1990, which we were speaking about movies that traumatized us, and depending on how old you were when you saw The Witches, this film might have traumatized you too. At least the 1990 version based on the book. And I mean, I personally thought the film was really cool, but when I saw it, and I was very young at the time, I wasn't in kindergarten yet. I think what scared me the most, and this is not the fun fact, it's just a random piece about me, but what scared me the most was the little girl in the painting. That whole story about her curse, that, with the little girl who was kidnapped by a witch and stuck in a painting. But anyway, so our fun fact for the witches, the hotel where the movie starring the amazing Angelica Houston was filmed is actually a now over 120-year-old hotel called the Headland in Cornwall, England. So I've got two little fun facts for this. First of all, Rowan Atkinson, you guys might know him as Mr. Bean, but he also played in The Witches. One night he accidentally left his bath running before he went to bed, and he ended up flooding the entire ground floor of the hotel, or a big portion of it, including the film's production office. So that happened while they were trying to produce a film. And the other thing that I thought was interesting is that this hotel is supposedly haunted by a ghost, which is effectively a lady wearing a quote, long dark coat without arms and a funny small white hat on her head. So, whilst they were filming there, cast and crew had to make sure to, yeah, not bump into this hotel's ghost at night. So I thought that was funny. There's a lot of trivia behind this film as well. I completely forgot that Angelica Houston was dating what's his face at the time. I keep wanting to say Jack, but
Yeah, Jack Nicholson.
from Jack Nicholson. That's it. That's it. Jack Nicholson at the time. I keep wanting to say Jack. What was his name? Bill, Bob. Yeah. So yeah. So apparently he was also constantly sending her roses, and the women who were taking the phone calls in the hotel, they got excited every time Jack Nicholson called and stuff. So really interesting. Um, and and funnily enough, I'm going to bring up this movie later as well, but he had Angelica Houston, he pushed for her to get an audition for the film Witches of Eastwick, but apparently she wasn't quite so compelling at her audition, and the role went to another actress. I believe that was the role that went to Cher ultimately. And speaking of Witches of Eastwick, that is the third film I'm going to be talking about from 1987. So this I thought was pretty fun. Apparently, the producer, John Peters, had before shooting recently seen the film Aliens, and he was so obsessed with the film itself and the box office numbers that he wanted to make the film Witches of Eastwick about aliens. So he even showed up to set one day with a stuntman dressed as an alien and requested to have him randomly put into a scene, any scene, just wanted him in the background of some scene. And the director, George Miller, and the actor, Jack Nicholson, actually had to leave the set in protest until Peters agreed to drop the idea. So I thought that was that was really interesting. I mean, I personally love the film Witches of Eastwick, but the idea of that being about aliens seems a little, I probably still love it, but it was a little out there. So my next film trivia is The Craft. So this I thought was quite interesting. Originally, I think it was Rochelle, is that the name of the character? Her story revolved around an eating disorder. But before going into production, the screenplay and script were altered to cast Rachel True, who is a woman of color, and make her storyline and her character arc about being bullied based on race. And originally, that was not intended for the story and for the film, but they wanted her as an actress and they wanted to bring attention to this. And so, yeah, they ended up changing the script to accommodate for this particular storyline. And then, of course, you see the results, and it's very much about her being bullied by a very pretty, blonde girl. And yeah, just to draw attention to that issue. And then my last little fun fact around a famous witch themed horror film is for the film Hocus Pocus from 1993. So you might remember the undead boyfriend Billy Butcherson. So some of you might know that he was played by Doug Jones, which is even today one of our favorite creature actors. So it turns out that Doug Jones had a mouth rig for the role. Now you might be asking why. Well, let me explain what this mouth rig was. It was a latex pocket attached to dentures that blocked off Jones's throat. And the reason why they did this was because that scene where he opens his mouth and moths fly out, those were actually real moths. And so they gave him this mouth rig so that they could just stay in his mouth without getting stuck. And then when he opened his mouth, could just fly out. So Doug Jones has actually literally spit out live moths, and it wasn't just a prop. There you go. Those are my famous witch film fun facts.
Nice. That's I had heard the witch thing through passing. Remember that. I remember hearing the stories about all the research that would gone on about how the sets were being built with like actual wood from that century, and that all the sets were handcrafted, and all the the wardrobe and
Mm,
stuff was done period detail and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that makes sense. I may have heard the one with witches and witches of Eastwick. I can't recall if I've ever like heard them in fact, but I remember hearing like behind the scenes trivia about those two, so that makes sense. I'd never heard the one about the craft though. That one was actually kind of new. Yeah,
yeah,
it
it's
makes sense when
exciting
you
though.
yeah, it makes sense when you say that, because that was kind of I think that was her eating, just that was like the way that the witchcraft comes back to get her, was I think she ends up like starving herself or something, I remember.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, that makes sense saying that. So yeah, that one, that's pretty cool. And then Hocus Pocus, I don't know much because I've only seen it once. Not the target audience, unfortunately,
hey, everyone's
but
the
it's
target audience for Hocus Pocus.
yeah. I've seen it. I've seen it once. I may have to give it another shot under more appropriate conditions, but even still, it's pretty interesting because I've always been a fan of Doug Jones. So hearing about all the
Yeah, same.
yeah, the stuff that he goes through for his roles, yeah, that's always pretty fascinating stuff. Like, I mean, I'm just a huge fan of those kinds of characters, performers in general. So, but yeah, that was
Yeah, Doug Jones did, I think just a few weeks, months ago, he actually got an award from, you know what, I can't even remember the name, but there's this big makeup and special effects makeup alliance, and they created a category for people who wear special effects makeup, and it's a completely new category, and Doug Jones is the first person to get it because they were saying that there needs to be more appreciation for the people who are able to wear all this and still act and portray a character or a creature. And
mhm.
Doug Jones is just so brilliant at it. I mean, he's the guy. I mean, there are a lot of amazing creature actors, but yeah, he's fantastic. And I remember speaking to Stephen Kostansky, who directed Psycho Gorman, amongst other films, and he was saying that because obviously their main character, he's in heavy makeup and a suit, and he said it's something you have to learn. And the guy who played the lead, he's a great actor, and he was perfect for the role, but it took some getting used to, and it took some design alterations as well, because there are certain things you might not think about from the get-go, and you really need to train yourself to act and work in the suit. You need to have endurance. It's on your body all day, so to not just have that, but also move in a certain way. I, for one, would probably get really claustrophobic. But it's amazing. And so just another story like this, where it's like, even decades ago, when Doug Jones only first started becoming famous with these creatures that he was playing, it's like, let's just stuff moths into his mouth. Like, what were people thinking? And it's like, good for you, Doug.
Yeah, I mean, I've got tons of stories. I mean, I was a huge fan of Godzilla growing up, so I mean, I can tell stories about all the trauma and the tribulations that went through filming that stuff. Because I mean,
I can
I can go on for
imagine.
days. Yeah, I mean, well, I mean, real briefly, one thing that most people don't realize is that that's not the sequences in those films are not filmed in real time. They're filmed at high speed and the cameras are overcranked, so it slows the movement down.
Oh.
So you're wearing two 300-pound rubber costumes in barely ventilated environments. Japan at that time had a very, very, very prominent smoking habit. So the entire cast and crew smoked heavily in unregulated environments. And because, like I said, you're overcranking the camera, you have to allow for all kinds of lighting issues. So it's not stage lights set at normal temperature. You have to double the temperature because you have to slow this camera down. So you can't just have regular light. You have to have it at double light. So
Whoa,
you're performing in these movements and you're trying to choreograph a wrestling match between two characters that can barely see, and you still have to make a compelling storyline out of it.
damn.
Yeah, and
That's crazy.
yeah, I mean I have the just tremendous, most amazing amount of respect for those kinds of people because I can't do it. I couldn't possibly stand it. I mean, I
No,
get
no.
uncomfortable. Yeah, I get uncomfortable wearing t-shirts for more than 5 hours. I mean, I can't even wear a. I mean,
Yeah.
I get uncomfortable at work for 5 hours. I can't even stand, a full body suit. So I mean,
I
yeah,
mean, obviously, as a woman, I can tell you that a lot of women get uncomfortable when they have to wear their bra for too long. I know it's a little TMI, but like real talk. So, I
yeah,
mean, I totally understand. I mean, the idea of having something all over your skin or completely being covered by this costume and no fresh air and extra weight. It's so yeah, it's not for me. I
yeah,
stand in the background and I will coordinate and delegate and applaud the people who do it. I'm not the person in the costume. But then again, I know people who love doing it because when they're in the costume, they can feel themselves transform into new people. And they freaking love it. Like they become different characters when they're in costume and if you live for it, then there's nothing else like it. So, to each
yeah,
his own.
yeah, definitely. I mean, yeah, I could not just respect anybody that goes through that anymore. So, but
For sure.
yeah. So guess that will wrap our show up. So this was as much fun as I thought. Thank you so much for coming on board and doing this.
Well, I'd probably add one more thing before we go, and that's
Yeah.
because we have been talking about witches, and I did want to bring up the topic of people who actually live their real lives as witches, because I do know a lot of people of various genders who are self-proclaimed witches. Some of them are very public about it, some of them not at all. Some belong to communities. A lot of them are kind of on their own. Generally, being a witch is defined by practicing witchcraft. There's not really much more to it by definition. And whether you agree with it or not, or believe it or not, is completely up to you. There is also a lot of variety amongst the witch community. So you can have everything from the very known like Wiccan direction to Christian witches, that's a thing, to witch cultures that are specific to a certain region or a cultural heritage tied to a certain region. Basically anywhere in the world you are, uh, there's going to be some sort of folklore that is tied to something more spiritual. And a lot of those have their own version of what a witch is. And it's a very vast and very interesting topic. And something that I have heard my witch friends complain about is that the depiction of witches is still very theatrical and comical, and it's not really real the way people who do consider themselves to be witches actually live their lives. They're still kind of waiting for a show where there's a roommate who is your roommate and just happens to be a witch, and there's not more to it. And it's really interesting because I think we're yet to get to a point where the broader audience is interested in seeing that. Even if you look at the chilling adventures of Sabrina, some of it is realistic or close to stories that exist, and a lot of it is like a blend of different cultures and also media presentations of what a witch is. Although I know that behind the scenes there were some people involved in the series who do dabble in the quote witchy and woo woo. So yeah, so there were people behind the scenes who knew what it was, but knew how to produce it in a way that was interesting for an audience. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, what you see in films and in series is very different from the stories that exist around witches, and different from how modern self-proclaimed witches actually, live their lives and practice their craft. And they're two very different things, but it's super interesting. And if you are genuinely interested in it, then definitely do some research. You'll also find that there are people even today in many parts of the world who are still prosecuted or even executed because they practice witchcraft, even if it is like the nature kind. South America still has issues depending on where you are with that. Um, but even in other countries, in on every continent, virtually, there are communities that are prosecuted because they live their lives as witches. So it's a really interesting topic, and if you ever want to leave media and look into it, what do people have to say about their lives as witches? It's hard to find some good and authentic sources, but when you do, yeah, it's really fascinating.
Yeah, my cousin, his best friend was a self-proclaimed witch, and he would regale stories about, all of the, times that they'd go out together, and, they talk about it, and, be all kind of like upset and disgusted at the way, it's like they were portrayed in media and films. It's like, yeah, we don't
Mm,
do that. We tend to the earth. We're healers. We don't, go around
right.
snatching babies and sacrifice them to the devil under the moonlight. I mean, that's just not what we do.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I can't speak much more than that. I mean, that's basically like the extent of what I can offer. I mean, I can't say much, but yeah, I do agree that there is a disparity between real life and filmdom, but I mean, yeah, other than that, yeah, I can't add much, but yeah, great stuff.
Yeah, very
Uh,
fascinating.
Yeah.
Cool. Well,
So
done. Thanks for having me.
yeah, this was great. I really appreciate you being here. So let people know where they can find you, and let them know what you do.
Well, I think the best place to find me is Instagram at lady underscore Mariam underscore Michael. And Mariam is like Maria with a second M at the end. And yeah, I'm a cross media horror producer. So if you ever want to talk to me about anything from filmmaking to games to stage productions to holograms to 3D mapping, and augmented and virtual reality, just to hit me up and let's let's get to know each other. As long as it's all horror, I am open to any conversations, and I'm looking forward to listening about your projects as well. So, yeah, but Don, thanks for having me. It's been awesome.
Oh, this was a blast. Yeah, thank you so much for being on board. You can find her information down below. I will have it linked in the show notes, as well as a few other surprises for you to check out her and her work. But thank you again for being on board. And until next time, we will see you with a new topic. Take care.
Bye bye.